The first thing I remember is the cold. Not the crisp, winter morning cold that bites at your cheeks and makes you feel alive, but a damp, heavy cold that seeps into your bones from the concrete floor beneath you. It was the kind of cold that smells of gasoline, forgotten paint cans, and the slow decay of things no one wants anymore. That was my new bedroom, the garage. My son Mark and his wife Jennifer had explained it so reasonably, their words like smooth, polished stones that had no sharp edges to fight against. They needed my room for the new baby, a nursery. It made sense, they'd said. It was only temporary, they'd promised. But as I lay there that night, listening to the hum of the old freezer and the scuttling of some small creature in the walls, I knew. I knew that in the house I had built with my own 2 hands and my own heart, I had become just another thing no one wanted anymore, stored away in the cold. My story doesn't begin in that garage. It begins decades earlier on a wind-swept hill just outside of Maple Creek, Ohio. My husband, Robert, and I had just bought the land. It was nothing but tangled weeds and a handful of stubborn oak trees back then. We were young, impossibly young, with more dreams than dollars in our pockets. Robert drew the plans for our house on the back of a napkin in a diner, his eyes shining with a light I'd follow anywhere. He designed it with big windows to let the morning sun spill in and a wide porch for watching thunderstorms roll across the valley. He wasn't an architect, not by trade. He was a high school history teacher. But he understood that a house wasn't just wood and nails. It was a vessel for a life. We poured the foundation ourselves, our hands raw and our backs aching, but our laughter echoed in the empty frame. I remember the day we raised the first wall. It felt monumental, like we were creating our own small corner of the world. Every part of that house held a memory. The fireplace mantel was carved from a fallen oak on the property, and Robert had spent a whole winter sanding it smooth. I can still feel the grain of the wood under my fingertips. I chose the floral wallpaper for the dining room, a pattern of tiny blue forget-me-nots. Robert had groaned, saying it was too fussy, but he hung it for me, his tongue stuck out in concentration as he tried to match the patterns perfectly. Our children, Mark and Sarah, were born in that house. Well, not literally born in it, but they were brought home to it, wrapped in soft blankets. Their first steps were taken on the warm oak floors of the living room. Their heights were marked in pencil on the kitchen doorframe, a ladder of tiny notches climbing higher and higher each year, a testament to the relentless march of time. The scuff marks on the baseboards were from Mark's toy trucks. The faint, almost invisible chip in the window pane was from the time Sarah threw a baseball a little too wildly. I never fixed it. It was part of the story. The house was filled with the sounds of living, the slam of the screen door, the bubble of soup on the stove, the murmur of the television in the evening. It was filled with smells, too. The scent of Robert's coffee in the morning, the aroma of my apple pie cooling on the counter, the clean, earthy smell of the garden after a summer rain. Robert's garden was his sanctuary. He'd spend hours out there, coaxing life from the soil, his big, gentle hands covered in dirt. He grew tomatoes that were sweeter than any you could buy in a store, and roses that filled the entire house with their perfume. When Sarah grew up and moved to the city, the house felt a little quieter. When Mark went to college, it grew quieter still, but it was always home. It was the place they returned to for holidays, bringing with them the noise and wonderful chaos of their own growing lives. And then, 10 years ago, the house fell silent in a way I never thought possible. We lost Robert, a heart attack swift and sudden. One moment he was telling me a joke as he washed the dinner dishes, the next he was gone. The silence he left behind was a physical presence. It was a weight in the air. The house, once our shared creation, became my sole responsibility. It was a beautiful, comforting burden. Every creak of the floorboards was a whisper from him. Every time I tended his roses, I felt him there with me. The house was my anchor in a sea of grief. It was my past, my present, and what I thought would be my future. I planned to live out all my days within those walls, surrounded by the loving ghosts of our shared life, until I was a ghost there myself. But loneliness is a patient predator. The big house started to feel too big. The upkeep was getting harder. The winters felt longer. Mark, who lived just an hour away, started to worry. He'd call every day, his voice tight with concern. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone in that big place," he'd say. "What if you fall? What if something happens?" Then Jennifer, his wife, had the idea. A brilliant idea, they called it. They were looking to get out of their cramped suburban house, and I was rattling around in a 4-bedroom family home. "We could move in with you, Mom," Mark had suggested, his voice filled with a manufactured brightness that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We could help with the bills, the yard work. Jen could help you with things around the house. The kids would love having their grandma right there. We could be a family again, all under one roof." It sounded so perfect, a solution to everyone's problems. I wouldn't be lonely anymore. They would have the space they craved. My grandchildren, Liam and Chloe, would fill the quiet halls with laughter again. I saw it all in my mind's eye. Family dinners, holidays together, the house bustling with life as it was meant to be. I saw myself reading stories to the children in the same armchair where I'd read to Mark and Sarah. I saw us all tending Robert's garden together. It felt like a gift, a second chance at the life that had been stolen from me when Robert died. So with a heart full of hope, I said yes. I opened my door, my home, and my life to them. I had no idea that I was not just inviting my family in, I was inviting in the beginning of my own erasure. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of boxes and misplaced furniture. It was chaotic, but in a happy way. Liam and Chloe's toys were scattered across the living room floor, and the sound of their little feet running down the hallway was music to my ears. I cooked their favorite meals, and we ate together at the big dining room table every night. It felt right. It felt like home again. But slowly, subtly, the tide began to turn. It wasn't one big event, but a series of small, almost imperceptible shifts. It started with the wallpaper. My blue forget-me-nots in the dining room. Jennifer mentioned it one afternoon, her head tilted to the side. "It's a little dated, don't you think, Eleanor?" she said, her voice sweet as honey. A nice neutral gray would really open up the space. I hesitated. That wallpaper was a piece of my history with Robert, but I didn't want to seem difficult. I was so grateful to have them there, so afraid of disrupting the fragile piece. "Of course, dear," I said. "Whatever you think is best." The next weekend, the forget-me-nots were gone, buried under a flat, lifeless coat of gray paint. The room did look bigger, I suppose, but it also looked colder. It looked like a room in a magazine, a room for strangers. Soon after, it was the curtains in the living room, the ones I had sewn myself. They were replaced with sleek, modern blinds. Then it was the old, comfortable sofa, the one Robert and I had bought for our 10th anniversary. It was hauled away and replaced with a stiff leather monstrosity that was impossible to get comfortable on. "The old one smelled a bit musty, Mom," Mark explained, avoiding my eyes, "and this one is much more practical with the kids." Each change was a small cut. A little piece of me, a little piece of Robert being sliced away and discarded. My things, the artifacts of my life, were quietly moved. My collection of porcelain birds was packed into a box and put in the attic. The photographs of Robert and me on the mantelpiece were replaced with framed pictures of the grandchildren. I loved my grandchildren dearly, but it felt as if my own life, my own marriage, was being deemed less important, less worthy of display. I tried to speak up once when Jennifer started talking about renovating the kitchen. My kitchen was the heart of the home. The old butcher block island was scarred with knife marks from decades of chopping vegetables for family meals. The cabinets were the original wood Robert had installed. "But this is where your father and I began." But Jennifer cut me off with a bright, dismissive smile. "Oh, Eleanor, we know. But it's just not functional. We need more counter space, stainless steel appliances. You'll love it, I promise." I started to feel like a ghost in my own house. I would walk into a room and find it completely changed, with no one having thought to ask me. My opinions were no longer sought, and if I offered one, it was treated as the quaint rambling of an old woman who didn't understand modern living. I became a visitor, a guest. I would retreat to my bedroom, the one room that was still mine, filled with my books, my photographs, my memories. It was my sanctuary. The children, Mark and Jennifer, started having conversations around me as if I weren't there. They'd discuss finances, plans for the house, and discipline for the kids, their voices flowing over and around me, making me feel invisible. I was mom, or grandma, a role I played, not a person with thoughts and feelings of her own. The loneliness I had felt when I was truly alone was a dull ache. This new loneliness, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who don't see you, was sharp and piercing. I spent more and more time in Robert's garden. It was the one place that hadn't been touched, the one place that was still ours. I'd pull weeds and prune his roses, my hands in the same soil he had worked. I'd talk to him out there, whispering my fears and my sadness to the rustling leaves. I told him how much I missed him. I told him I didn't know how to stop them from erasing us. Then Jennifer announced she was pregnant again. Another baby. There was joy, of course, but it was followed by a knot of dread in my stomach. The house suddenly felt smaller. The conversations about space became more frequent, more urgent. "We're going to be bursting at the seams," Jennifer would say with a sigh, rubbing her belly and looking around the living room. The conversation happened on a Sunday evening. We had just finished dinner. The kids were watching television. Mark cleared his throat, and I saw him exchange a look with Jennifer. It was the kind of look that precedes bad news. "Mom," he started, his voice unnaturally gentle. "Jen and I have been talking. With the new baby coming, we're really going to need another bedroom." I looked at him, confused, but all the bedrooms are full. "I know," he said, taking a deep breath. "That's the thing, we need your room. It's the biggest one, next to ours. It would be the perfect nursery." The air left my lungs. My sanctuary, the one place that was still mine. My room? I stammered. "But where would I go?" This is when Jennifer chimed in, her voice full of that same false brightness I had come to dread. "We've figured it all out. It's actually a great solution. We're going to clean out the garage. It's spacious and it has electricity. We can put up some drywall, lay down a rug. It'll be like your own little studio apartment. You'll have your own entrance and everything. It's only temporary, of course, just until we can figure something more permanent out." The garage. They wanted to put me in the garage, the place where we kept the lawnmower, the rusty tools, the boxes of Christmas decorations that were only brought out once a year, the cold, concrete box where spiders built their webs in the corners. I stared at them, speechless. I looked at my son, the baby I had held in my arms in this very house, and I saw a stranger who was politely, reasonably asking me to move into storage. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rage. I wanted to tell them how they had dismantled my life piece by piece and were now about to discard the final part of me. But I had forgotten how to fight for myself. Decades of putting my husband, my children, my family first had worn down my defenses. All I could manage was a weak, trembling whisper. "The garage? It'll be cozy, Mom, you'll see," Mark said, patting my hand. His touch felt foreign. "We'll start moving your things tomorrow." They smiled, relieved that the difficult conversation was over. They had their solution. They had what they wanted. They didn't see the devastation in my eyes. They didn't see that they hadn't just suggested moving my bed. They had just told me in the kindest way possible that I was no longer a part of the family that lived inside the house. I was just an accessory, one that could be conveniently stored away. And in the deafening silence that followed their cheerful pronouncement, I felt something inside me, something I thought had died with Robert, begin to crack. It was a cold, hard, and terrifying feeling. It was the feeling of being utterly and completely broken. The next day, they were true to their word. While I sat numbly in the living room on the uncomfortable leather sofa, they began to empty my life into boxes. Mark and Jennifer were efficient, their movements brisk and purposeful. They worked with the cheerful energy of people embarking on a home improvement project, oblivious to the fact that they were dismantling a human heart. I watched as they took down the pictures from my walls, a photo of Robert and me on our wedding day, a faded picture of my own parents, a crayon drawing Sarah had made for me in first grade. Each one was placed face down in a cardboard box, their stories silenced. My books, my companions for so many lonely nights, were swept from the shelves. My clothes, the scent of my perfume still clinging to them, were folded and packed away. They moved with a practiced ease, a team working towards a common goal. I was not part of that team. I was the obstacle being cleared. Chloe, my granddaughter, came and sat beside me for a moment. "Grandma, why are they putting your bed in the garage?" she asked, her big, innocent eyes searching mine for an answer. I didn't know what to tell her, How do you explain to a child that you've become an inconvenience? I just stroked her hair and said, "It's just for a little while, sweetie." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. The final indignity was the bed itself. My bed. The one Robert and I had shared for over 40 years. The one where I had woken up next to him every morning. The one where I had cried myself to sleep every night after he was gone. I watched as Mark unscrewed the headboard, the familiar dark wood that had framed so many of my dreams. He grunted with the effort, and Jennifer directed him. "Careful with the wall, honey." They carried the mattress out, then the box spring, then the frame. They were just objects to them, pieces of furniture to be moved. To me, they were sacred relics. By late afternoon, it was done. My room, my sanctuary, was a hollow, empty space. All that remained were pale squares on the walls where the pictures had hung. Jennifer was already in there with a tape measure, chattering excitedly about crib placement and changing tables. I walked, as if in a dream, out to the garage. They had done what they promised. They had swept a section of the concrete floor. They had laid down a cheap, thin area rug. My bed was reassembled in the corner, next to the towering shelves of old tools and half-empty cans of oil. My little nightstand looked absurdly small and out of place beside a stack of old tires. They had run an extension cord from the wall and plugged in my reading lamp. "See?" Jennifer said, beaming as she followed me in. "It's not so bad, is it? We even put the rug down for you. It's almost cozy." Cozy. The word hung in the cold, damp air. The garage smelled of mildew and dust. I could see my breath. I looked at my bed, my last bastion of comfort and memory, sitting there amidst the clutter and the grime. I looked at my son and his wife, their faces bright with accomplishment, so proud of their clever solution. And in that moment, the cracks that had formed inside me shattered completely. The sadness, the grief, the slow-burning resentment of the past few months, it all coalesced into a single diamond-hard point of clarity. They didn't see me. They would never see me. To them, this was a reasonable compromise. To me, it was a declaration. It was the end. That night, I lay in my bed in the garage. The cold was relentless. I pulled the thin blankets up to my chin, but it did nothing to stop the chill that came up from the floor. The metal garage door rattled every time the wind blew. I could hear the muffled sounds of my family inside the warm house. The murmur of the television, a burst of laughter, the sound of the dishwasher running. They were so close, just a thin wall away, but they might as well have been on another planet. I felt a profound and absolute loneliness that was deeper than anything I had felt even in the rawest days of my grief for Robert. I stared up into the darkness at the exposed rafters where cobwebs hung like ghostly chandeliers, and I thought about Robert. I thought about us on that hill planning our future. We had poured so much love into that house. We had intended for it to be a fortress of family, a place of warmth and safety for generations to come. And look what it had become. It had become my prison, a place where my own son saw me as clutter to be stored away. The memories I had cherished, the ones that had sustained me, now felt tainted. The thought of my forget-me-not wallpaper buried under a coat of lifeless gray paint made my stomach hurt. The thought of Jennifer's new stainless steel appliances in my warm, beloved kitchen felt like a violation. The house was no longer my home. It was just a building, and the people inside it were strangers who happened to share my DNA. Something shifted in me then, in the cold and the dark of that garage. The tears I had been holding back for months finally came, but they weren't tears of self-pity. They were tears of rage. A quiet, cold rage that burned away the fog of grief and compliance. Who was this woman who allowed herself to be treated this way? Who was this person who let her own child erase her? That wasn't the woman Robert had married. That wasn't the woman who had helped raise the walls of this very house. I thought about his words, something he used to say when I was feeling overwhelmed. "Eleanor," he'd say, taking my hands in his, "you can't change the wind, but you can always adjust your sails." For 10 years, I had been drifting, grieving, accommodating, shrinking. My sails were torn and limp, but in that garage, a new wind picked up, and I knew with a certainty that shook me to my core what I had to do. I was not going to spend another night in that garage. I was not going to spend another day being invisible. They thought they had put me in my place. They had no idea that they had just shown me the way out. As the first hint of dawn began to creep under the garage door, I was no longer crying. I was planning. My apathetic sadness had been forged into a cold, hard, and liberating resolve. I was going to adjust my sails. I did not sleep a wink that night. I lay in the cold, listening to the house settle, my mind racing with a clarity I hadn't felt in a decade. The decision once made was surprisingly simple. It was like a logjam breaking in a river. Once the key piece moved, everything else flowed with an unstoppable force. The sun was barely a pink smear on the horizon when I quietly slipped out of the garage. I didn't go back into the house. The thought of stepping inside felt like trespassing. Instead, I walked out into the garden, Robert's garden. The morning dew was cold on my slippers. I touched the petals of a late-blooming rose, its velvety texture a small comfort. "It's time, my love," I whispered into the quiet air. "I have to let it go." I went back to the garage, retrieved my purse and my old address book from a box. I found the number I was looking for, a woman named Carol who had been a friend for years and also happened to be the most successful real estate agent in Maple Creek. I walked to the end of the long driveway, my cell phone in my hand, and made the call. It was barely 7 in the morning. "Carol, it's Eleanor Vance," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "I'm sorry to call so early, but it's important. I need to sell my house." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Eleanor, are you all right? Sell the house? Your house?" "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "And I need to do it quickly, immediately if possible. I want it sold by the end of the day." Carol, bless her heart, didn't waste time with 1,000 questions. She heard the steel in my voice. "Okay, Eleanor, I have a developer, a cash buyer, who's been looking for a property with a large lot on your side of town for months. He'll lowball you for a quick sale, you know that." "The price doesn't matter," I said, and I was shocked to find I meant it. The money was secondary. The freedom, the finality, that was the prize. "What matters is that it's done, today." "I'll make the call," she said. "I'll be there in an hour." I spent that hour not packing, but choosing. I walked through the house for the last time, a true ghost now, while my family slept unaware. I didn't look at the gray dining room or the monstrous leather sofa. I looked for the things that were truly mine, the things that held the untainted memories. I took the old shoebox from the top of my closet filled with Robert's letters to me from when we were courting. I took the small, worn Bible my mother had given me. I took the framed photo of Robert and me, laughing on a beach from my bedside table in the garage. I packed one small suitcase with a few changes of clothes, these few precious items, and my important papers. That was it. 45 years of life in that house reduced to a single suitcase, and it felt impossibly like liberation. Carol arrived as promised, her face a mixture of concern and professional resolve. The developer and his partner were with her. They walked the property, their faces impassive. They saw acreage, not a garden of memories. They saw square footage, not a lifetime of love. They made an offer. As Carol predicted, it was low. It was probably 20% below market value. I looked at the number on the paper, and I felt nothing but relief. I signed the documents right there, on the hood of Carol's car. By 10 in the morning, a small sale pending sign was being hammered into the front lawn. It felt like a victory flag. Carol drove me to the bank to deposit the initial check, and then to a small, clean motel on the edge of town. "Are you sure about this, Eleanor?" she asked, her hand on my arm. I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled a genuine smile. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Carol. Thank you." The call from Mark came around noon. I let it ring for a moment before I answered, savoring the small sliver of power. "Mom, where are you? There's a for sale sign in our front yard. It must be some kind of prank, right?" His voice was laced with confused amusement. "It's not a prank, Mark," I said calmly. "I sold the house this morning." The silence that followed was so profound I thought the call had dropped. Then his voice came back, tight and sharp. "You what? You can't do that. This is our home. Where are we supposed to live?" "Our home." The possessiveness in his tone was astonishing. "It was my home, Mark," I corrected him gently, "and I decided I no longer wanted to live there. You have 30 days to vacate. It's all in the contract." "30 days?" he shrieked. Jennifer was in the background now, her voice rising in panic. How could you do this to us, Mom? After we moved in here to help you, the baby is coming. We have nowhere to go. This is unbelievably selfish. The word they had used to describe me was the very word that defined their own actions. The irony was staggering. You know, Jennifer, I said, my voice still quiet, still calm. I was thinking about that last night while I was trying to sleep in the garage. I realized that putting your mother's bed next to a lawnmower so you can have a bigger nursery might also be considered selfish. It all depends on your perspective, doesn't it? There was more sputtering, more accusations, more outrage. They couldn't comprehend it. In their version of the story, they were the saviors, and I was the grateful, doddering old mother. The idea that I had my own thoughts, my own breaking point, my own power was completely alien to them. They had never considered me a person with agency. They had only seen me as a resource, and now that resource was gone. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just listened to them exhaust their indignation. When they were finished, I said, I have to go now. I wish you the best in finding a new place. And I hung up. I turned off my phone. I sat on the edge of the stiff motel bed and I breathed. For the first time in years, I felt the air fill my lungs completely. The weight of that house, the weight of their expectations, the weight of my own silent complicity, it all just lifted. I was 68 years old. I had one suitcase, a check in the bank, and no earthly idea what I was going to do next, and I felt a thrill of pure, unadulterated freedom. I stayed in that motel for a week. I bought a few new clothes. I ate in diners, reading a newspaper from cover to cover. I took long walks. I didn't answer the dozens of frantic calls and texts from Mark and Sarah, who he had undoubtedly called with his tale of woe. I needed the silence. I needed to find myself again. One afternoon, sitting in a coffee shop, I saw a travel magazine. On the cover was a picture of a small, windswept town on the coast of Oregon. Cliffs, crashing waves, and a tiny, picturesque harbor. Robert and I had always talked about seeing the Pacific Ocean. It was one of those someday dreams that we never got around to. I bought a one-way bus ticket that same day. The journey took 3 days. As the bus wound its way through mountains and deserts, I felt like I was shedding my old life with every mile that passed. When I finally stepped off the bus in that little coastal town, the air was cool and tasted of salt. I could hear the cry of gulls and the distant roar of the ocean. I found a small, furnished apartment for rent with a big window that looked out over the water. It was 1/10 of the size of my old house. It was perfect. I spent my days walking on the beach collecting sea glass. I joined a book club at the local library. I volunteered at the animal shelter. I made friends, people who knew me not as Mark's mom or Robert's widow, but just as Eleanor, a woman who loved to read and had a knack for growing roses in pots on her balcony. My daughter, Sarah, eventually found me. She came to visit, her face etched with worry. We sat on my little balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. She cried. She apologized for not seeing what was happening, for not standing up for me. I don't know who Mark is anymore, she sobbed. I do, I said, taking her hand. He's the man we raised him to be, independent and focused on his own family. We just never imagined his family wouldn't have room for me. I don't hate my son. I feel a deep, abiding sadness for him. He lost more than a house. He lost his history. He lost his mother. He just doesn't know it yet. Perhaps one day he will. My life is small now, but it is entirely my own. My home is no longer a sprawling house filled with ghosts and expectations. It's a tiny apartment filled with the sound of the ocean, the smell of salt spray, and the quiet comfort of my own company. I learned a hard lesson in that cold garage. I learned that a home is not a place. It's not wood and nails and wallpaper. A home is a place where you are loved and respected and seen. And if you can't find that with others, you must learn to build it within yourself. I had to lose my house to finally truly come home. It's a funny thing, the sound of the ocean. In the beginning, it was just noise, a constant, roaring companion to my solitude. It was so different from the deep, earthy silence of the Ohio countryside I had known my whole life. But after a few months here in this little town of Seacliff, Oregon, I learned to hear the nuances in its voice. There's the angry crash of the waves during a winter storm, a sound that feels like a cleansing rage. There's the gentle, rhythmic shushing on a calm summer evening, a lullaby for a restless heart. And then there's the sound I love most, the quiet, steady murmur at low tide when the water pulls back to reveal the secrets of the seabed. It sounds like a whisper, like it's telling you stories of all the things it has held and all the things it has let go. In a way, I suppose I've been learning to do the same. My apartment is small, just 3 rooms perched on a cliffside, but its single enormous window makes it feel as vast as the sky. I have filled it not with things, but with light. There are no heavy curtains here, no fussy wallpaper. The walls are a pale sandy white, and the only decorations are the treasures I find on my daily walks along the shore. A line of smoothly polished stones on the pop windowsill, a glass jar filled with opalescent sea glass, a strangely beautiful piece of driftwood that looks like a leaping dolphin. I bought a comfortable armchair, a soft blue that reminds me of the sky on a clear day, and placed it right in front of that window. That is my throne. From there, I watch the world. I watch the fishing boats chug out of the harbor at dawn and the seagulls wheeling on the wind. I watch the fog roll in and swallow the horizon, and I watch the sun burn it away again. Life here has found a gentle rhythm, like the tides. On Tuesdays, I have my book club at the town library. There's Agnes, a retired nurse with a wicked sense of humor and hair the color of snow. There's Michael, a former English professor from Portland who can quote Shakespeare at the drop of a hat. We argue about characters and plot points, we drink lukewarm coffee from paper cups, and we laugh. For that 1 hour a week, I am not a widow or a displaced mother. I am simply Eleanor, a woman with a strong opinion on the works of Alice Munro. On Thursdays and Saturdays, I volunteer at the local animal shelter. The work is simple. Cleaning cages, feeding the cats, walking the dogs, but it fills a space in me I didn't know was still empty. There is something profoundly healing in the unquestioning affection of an animal, in the rough lick of a dog's tongue, or the rumbling purr of a cat curled in your lap. They don't know my story. They don't care where I came from. They just know the kindness in my hands. My daughter Sarah calls me every Sunday. Her voice is my one remaining tether to the life I left behind, and it's a tether I hold with a careful, gentle hand. She never pressures me. She never asks if I regret my decision. She just tells me about her week, about her job at the art gallery, about the funny thing her cat did. And then, cautiously, she gives me the news from Ohio. It was through Sarah that I learned what happened to the house. The developer, the cash buyer, had no interest in Robert's garden or the fireplace he had built. He was interested in the land. The house was torn down within a month of the sale, razed to the ground. When Sarah told me, her voice thick with tears, I expected to feel a fresh wave of grief, a shattering loss. Instead, I felt a strange and quiet peace. The house of memories was gone, but so was the house of pain. It no longer existed for them to possess, to change, to occupy. It was simply gone, returned to the earth, a final, clean ending to that chapter of my life. Through Sarah, I also heard about Mark and Jennifer. They had been forced to move into a small, rented condominium on the other side of town. According to Sarah, they were struggling. The money they had been saving by living with me had been eaten up by deposits and moving costs. Mark was working longer hours. Jennifer was stressed, uncomfortable in the last stages of her pregnancy, and deeply, furiously bitter. She had told everyone, Sarah said, that I had abandoned them, that I had a breakdown, and selfishly thrown them out onto the street out of spite. Some people believed her. My name in the town where I had lived for nearly 50 years was now a subject of gossip and pity. I was the poor, confused old woman who had lost her mind. Hearing this stung, I won't lie, but the sting was distant, like a memory of a pain rather than a fresh wound. What did their opinions matter to me now? Their opinions were formed in a world I no longer inhabited. I was here, breathing the salt air, watching the waves. They were there, trapped in their own narrative of blame and resentment. "He tried calling you again, Mom," Sarah told me one Sunday, her voice hesitant. "He's left a dozen voicemails on your old number. They're not very nice." I imagined the sound of his voice, tight with anger and self-pity. "That's his choice, honey," I said. "My choice is not to listen." But then came the news that I knew was inevitable. The baby was born a boy. Sarah called me the day after he arrived. "He's beautiful, Mom," she said softly. "He has the Vance eyes, dark and deep." I closed my own eyes, and for a moment I could picture it. A tiny wrinkled face, a shock of dark hair, a new life, born out of the ashes of my old one, a grandson I would likely never know. A fresh sadness bloomed in my chest, different from the grief for Robert, different from the pain of betrayal. This was a sadness for a future that would never be, for the empty space in a family album where a grandmother's picture should be. "What did they name him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sarah paused for a long moment. I could hear her take a deep breath on the other end of the line. "They named him Robert," she said. The name hit me like a physical blow. Robert. They had taken my husband's name, the name that was sacred to me, and had given it to the child whose impending arrival had been the reason for my exile. I didn't know what to feel. Was it an olive branch? A clumsy attempt to honor the man whose memory they had so carelessly disregarded? Or was it something else? A strategic move, a way to try and pull at my heartstrings, to manipulate me with the one thing they knew I held most dear. The call ended soon after that. I sat in my blue armchair for hours, long after the sun had set, and watched the dark, restless ocean. They had used Robert's name. They had taken the last pure thing I had and tried to use it as a key to a door I had locked and bolted myself. And I knew with a weary certainty that my quiet peace was about to be tested. The tide was turning, and a storm was coming. A week later, a package arrived. It was a small, padded envelope with a postmark from Maple Creek, Ohio. My son's handwriting was on the address label. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, there was no letter, no note of apology, no explanation. There was only a single photograph. It was of a baby, my new grandson, sleeping peacefully in a blue blanket. He was perfect, as all new babies are. On the back of the photograph, in Jennifer's neat, cursive script, were just 3 words, Robert Vance II. I stared at that photograph for a long time. I traced the curve of his tiny cheek with my finger. He did have the Vance eyes, even closed, you could tell. He looked so innocent, so completely unaware of the wreckage his arrival had caused. He was my blood. He was Robert's grandson. And I felt a pull, a deep, primal yearning to know him, to hold him. It was a physical ache in my chest. This, I realized, was their strategy. They knew I could resist their anger, their accusations. But could I resist this? An innocent baby who carried my husband's name? The photograph sat on my kitchen counter for days, a silent accusation. Every time I looked at it, I felt a fresh wave of conflict. My mind warred with my heart. My mind, the one that had found clarity in that cold garage, screamed at me to be careful. It reminded me of the gray paint, of the condescending smiles, of the chill of the concrete floor. It reminded me that they hadn't changed. They had just changed their tactics. They didn't want me, Eleanor. They wanted what I could provide. A babysitter, financial help, absolution for their own behavior. To let them back in even an inch would be to invite the chaos back into my sanctuary. It would be a betrayal of the woman I had fought so hard to become. But my heart, that foolish, stubborn organ, ached for the child. It whispered to me of forgiveness, of family, of the love for a grandchild that is supposed to be a natural, God-given right. It told me I was being cold and hard. It told me I was punishing a baby for the sins of his parents. It reminded me of holding Mark when he was that small, the weight of him in my arms, his milky breath on my cheek. How could I deny myself that? How could I deny this child his grandmother? I lost sleep over it. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, the sound of the ocean roaring in my ears, my stomach in knots. During the day, I was distracted. At my book club, I couldn't follow the conversation. Agnes noticed. "You're a million miles away, Eleanor," she said gently, placing her hand on my arm. "Everything all right?" I wanted to tell her. I wanted to pour out the whole sordid story, but I couldn't. It felt too private, too shameful. So I just nodded and said I was tired. The breaking point came during a walk on the beach. It was a blustery afternoon, and the wind whipped my hair across my face. I was walking near the tide pools, watching the tiny anemones wave their delicate tentacles. I saw a young family, a mother and a father, with a little girl who couldn't have been more than 3. The father was holding her hand, helping her leap over the little streams of water left by the receding tide. She was squealing with delight, her laughter carried away by the wind. And the mother watched them, her face filled with such a pure, uncomplicated love that it made my own heart crack. That was what family was supposed to be. Simple, loving, safe. My family was a tangled knot of obligation, resentment, and manipulation. I looked at the family, then I looked out at the vast gray ocean, and I knew what Robert would have told me. He would have told me that love should never be a weapon. It should never be used as leverage. The love I felt for that unknown baby was pure, but the path to him was poisoned by the expectations of his parents. To reach him, I would have to walk through their territory, play by their rules, and I had sworn to myself I would never do that again. I walked back to my apartment, my resolve hardening with every step. I picked up the photograph of the baby. I looked at his peaceful face one last time. "I do love you," I whispered to the picture. "And because I love you, I cannot be the grandmother your parents want me to be." I put the photograph away in the old shoebox with Robert's letters. I would keep it. It was part of my story. But it would not be a tool used against me. That evening, I did something I hadn't planned. I went to the animal shelter, even though it wasn't my volunteer day. The manager, a kind woman named Susan, let me in. I walked to the last cage in the quietest corner. In it was an old, one-eyed dog named Buster. He'd been there for 6 months. He was scruffy and grizzled, and nobody wanted him because he was too old, too set in his ways. He'd just lie in the back of his cage, looking at people with his one sad brown eye. I had always had a soft spot for him. "I'd like to adopt him," I told Susan. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Buster? Are you sure, Eleanor? He's a lot of work." "We have that in common," I said with a small smile. I took Buster home that night. He was nervous at first, sniffing every corner of my small apartment. I put down a soft bed for him near my armchair. He circled it 3 times and then collapsed onto it with a weary sigh. I sat in my chair and watched him, and he watched me back with his one good eye. We were 2 old souls who had been discarded, who had found a safe harbor. A few days later, I sat down and wrote a card. I found one with a simple picture of a sailboat on it. Inside, I wrote, "Congratulations on the birth of your son. I wish him a life filled with health, happiness, and love. Enclosed is a small gift for his future." I wrote a check for a modest amount, enough to open a small savings account for him, but not enough to be seen as a solution to their financial problems. I addressed it to Robert Vance II. I signed it, "With love, your grandmother, Eleanor." I did not include my return address. I did not include my phone number. It was not an act of forgiveness, not yet. It was an act of love sent from a safe distance. It was a boundary. It was a declaration that my love for my grandchild would exist on my terms, not theirs. I could be his grandmother without being their pawn. As I dropped the envelope into the mailbox, I felt the last of the turmoil inside me settle. I had not chosen the easy path, but I had chosen my path. I had chosen peace. I had chosen myself. I walked back to my apartment, the sound of Buster's tags jingling beside me. I opened my door, and from my window I could see the setting sun turning the ocean to liquid gold. I had lost a house, but I had built a home, and for the first time it felt like it was strong enough to withstand any storm. Time, I've discovered, moves differently by the ocean. It doesn't march forward in the rigid, predictable way it did in Ohio, marked by the school year, the harvest, the first frost. Here, time is a fluid thing, pulled and pushed by the moon and the tides. An entire winter passed in a blur of magnificent storms that sent sea spray clear up to my window, and then a spring bloom that was so vibrant, so full of the salty promise of new life, that it felt like the world was being born all over again. My life settled into the rhythm of this place. Buster and I became a familiar sight on the beach, me in my sensible walking shoes and him trotting along beside me, his one good eye scanning the horizon as if he were the captain of a grand ship. My little apartment became a haven. Agnes and Michael from the book club would come over for tea, and we'd sit in the pool of sunlight by the window, talking for hours. They knew I was from the Midwest, that I had a son and a daughter, but they never pressed for details. Here, your past was your own business. What mattered was the person you were today, the stories you chose to share. I learned to bake again, not the big family-sized pies I used to make, but small tarts and savory scones. I found a joy in cooking for one, in pleasing no one's palate but my own. For the first time in my adult life, I was living without the constant, low-level hum of considering someone else's needs and wants above my own. The silence of it was strange at first, but it gradually blossomed into a profound peace. I was no longer a wife, no longer a resident hostess in my own home. I was just Eleanor. And Eleanor, it turned out, was someone I was quite happy to get to know. The card I sent to my grandson was a stone dropped into a deep well. For a long time, there was only silence. I didn't know if they had received it, if they had cashed the check, if it had angered them or softened them. I tried not to dwell on it. I had done what I needed to do, sent a small beacon of love out into the world without expectation. That was all I could control. I focused on the here and now, the warmth of Buster's head on my lap, the comforting weight of a book in my hands, the breathtaking beauty of a sunset that looked like a spilled can of paint. The silence broke on a Tuesday morning in early summer. My phone rang, displaying a number I didn't recognize, but it had an Ohio area code. My heart did a slow, heavy roll in my chest. I almost didn't answer, but a quiet strength, one I had been cultivating for months, took over. I was no longer afraid of his voice. I answered, "Mom?" It was Mark. His voice was different. The anger was gone, replaced by a thin, reedy tone that sounded like a frayed rope. "Hello, Mark," I said, my own voice calm and even. I was sitting in my blue armchair, looking out at the calm sea. "We got your card," he said. "The check. Thank you." There was a long, awkward pause. We've been trying to find you. Sarah wouldn't give us your address." "That was her decision," I said simply. "Mom, I don't understand any of this," he said, and the frustration in his voice was palpable. "Why did you do it? Just run away like that?" "We were a family." I took a deep breath, the salty air filling my lungs. The old Eleanor would have launched into a defense. She would have listed her grievances, her pain, her reasons. But the new Eleanor knew that was pointless. He wasn't looking for understanding. He was looking for a way back to the way things were, a way to absolve himself. "The family you're talking about, Mark, stopped existing for me the night I slept in the garage," I said, my voice gentle but firm. There was no anger in it. Only a simple statement of fact, as clear and solid as a stone on the beach. "It was temporary," he insisted, his voice rising. "We were going to build you an addition. We just needed time. You didn't even give us a chance. You have a grandson, Mom, a beautiful baby boy named after Dad, and he doesn't have a grandmother. Don't you care about that?" There it was, the guilt, the final, most powerful weapon in their arsenal. A year ago, it would have shattered me. Now, I saw it for what it was, a desperate attempt to pull me back into a role I was no longer willing to play. "I care about him very much," I said, and my voice was thick with a sincerity that surprised even me. "I think about him every day. I hope he has a wonderful, happy life, but my presence in his life would come at too high a cost to my own. I cannot be the person you and Jennifer want me to be. I don't think I ever was." "So that's it?" he asked, his voice cracking with disbelief. "You're just gone? You're choosing some new life over your own family? Over your own grandson?" "No, Mark," I said, looking out at the endless horizon where the blue of the sea met the blue of the sky. "I am choosing myself. It's the one choice I've never made before. I have to go now. Now. Goodbye." I hung up the phone before he could reply. I did not cry. I felt a deep, piercing sorrow for the son I had lost, for the man he had become who was so blind to anyone's pain but his own. But I also felt a steely sense of resolve. The door was closed. I had closed it gently, but I had locked it from my side. Buster, sensing my shift in mood, rested his heavy head on my knee and looked up at me with his one wise eye as if to say, "It's all right. We're home." A month later, Sarah came to visit. Seeing her step out of the taxi in front of my little apartment building was like watching the sun come out from behind a cloud. We hugged for a long time, and I felt the familiar, unconditional love that had been a quiet anchor in the storm of the past year. She looked around my little apartment, her eyes wide. "Oh, Mom," she said, her voice soft, "it's so you. It's so peaceful." She hadn't come to mediate or to plead Mark's case. She had come to see me, to be with me. We spent 4 days together. We walked on the beach, and I taught her how to spot the best sea glass. We cooked dinner together in my tiny kitchen, laughing as we bumped elbows. We went to my book club, and she charmed Agnes and Michael with her stories about the art world. For the first time in over a year, I felt like a mother again, but in a new way. We were not mother and child, but two women, two friends, sharing a life. On her last evening, we were sitting on my small balcony, wrapped in blankets against the cool evening air, watching the lights of the fishing boats twinkle in the harbor. "He doesn't get it, does he?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. "No, I don't think he ever will. He sees what I did as a punishment directed at him. He can't see that it was a rescue mission for me." "He and Jennifer, they're not happy," Sarah said, picking at a loose thread on her blanket. "The new baby is wonderful, but everything else is hard. They fight about money. They resent having to live in that small condo. Jennifer blames you for everything. Mark just seems lost." I felt a pang of something, but it wasn't guilt. It was a distant, mournful pity. "They built their future on a weak foundation, honey," I said. "They thought they could just build it on top of my life without asking. But my life wasn't theirs to build on." Sarah pulled an envelope from her purse. "I brought you something," she said. Inside was a new photograph of my grandson, Robert. He was about 6 months old now, sitting up with a big gummy smile and those impossibly dark Vance eyes. He was beautiful. I took the photo, and this time, there was no conflict, no turmoil. There was only love, pure and simple. "Thank you," I whispered, my eyes filling with tears. "He's perfect." "He is," Sarah said, leaning her head on my shoulder. "And he'll know about you, Mom. I'll make sure of it. I'll tell him stories about his grandma Eleanor, the one who was brave enough to cross the country to find the ocean, the one who taught me what it means to be strong." We sat in silence for a long time after that, watching the stars come out, one by one. Her words were the greatest gift she could have given me. My legacy wouldn't be a house. It wouldn't be a perfectly kept garden. My legacy, perhaps, would be this story. The story of a woman who remembered who she was just in time. After Sarah left, a deeper quiet settled over my life. The final test had been passed, the last tether to the past negotiated. The photograph of little Robert sits on my bookshelf now, next to the one of his grandfather laughing on a beach. They are two bookends of a life, one a beautiful memory and the other a hopeful future, both held at a loving, peaceful distance. My life is not grand, it is not filled with excitement, but it is filled with meaning, a meaning I have forged for myself. It's in the wag of Buster's tail when I pick up his leash. It's in the shared laughter with Agnes over a particularly bad novel. It's in the quiet satisfaction of a perfect cup of tea enjoyed in my blue armchair. It is a life built not on the shifting sands of other people's needs and approval, but on the solid rock of my own self-worth. Sometimes, when a big storm rolls in off the Pacific, the wind howls and the rain lashes against my window, and the whole building seems to tremble. In those moments, I think of the house in Ohio. I think of its deep foundation, the one Robert and I poured with our own hands. It was a strong foundation, meant to last a lifetime. But a foundation is only as good as the house that's built upon it, and the life that was being built there in the end was not one I could live in. I look around my little apartment, a place that is truly wholly mine, and I realize that the most important foundation I ever built was the one I laid down right here inside myself on the day I decided I was worth more than a bed in a garage. I am Eleanor Vance, I'm 69 years old, and I am finally home.